Yes, yeah. Well,
And
it's flavour, texture, and temperature. That is those three things. That's and like at Noma, they served us this brain custard, and I don't mind eating brain custard. It's fine. Give me a brain custard, but it was grainy. The texture was grainy. It was a horrible texture, and it's like fine, make a brain custard, but your job, Noma, the best restaurant in the world, is to make it delicious, and you have failed at that. Delicious as its flavour, texture, and temperature. The flavour was forgettable. The temperature was cold, of course, and the texture was gross. Like it was awful, and my wife couldn't even finish it. And they kind of said to her snobbishly, "Don't you like offal?" And she said, "No, I don't mind offal. It's just the texture is grainy," and it felt like they were greatly offended that my wife was just refusing to play along with this madness.
What are some restaurants you really like in London?
In London,
do you go up to London much? Because you're Kent, aren't you?
I'm Kent. Yeah, I mean, in London, I as you can probably guess, I miss Gavroche. I used to like going to Gavroche. Because they specialised, and I interviewed him once, Michel Roux, and I said because they used to have 3-star, went down to 2, and I said, do you feel bad about missing the 3-star? And he said, no, because if you do 3-star, you've got to be all experimental. I don't want that. I want to do the classics. I want to do them perfectly. And if we do that, we're never going to get above 2. And I thought, well, that's fair enough. And so I love all that old fashioned pre-Nouvelle stuff. But in a non-Michelin space, I really like, do you know a restaurant called Blacklock in Soho?
Mate. Yeah. The chops.
Yes, really great. I mean, like really inventive. I had they served me a crumpet with slow cooked lamb on top of it. It's just unbelievably delicious. And there was a sweet potato that had been cooked over ash for 11 hours. I mean, just absolutely really interesting, unusual. A crumpet with meat on it. And then you poured gravy on it. It was great. And the sweet potato. Oh, I mean, they
do the. So I've been there a couple of times. I walk out like a fat fuck, like a literally. But like they do the cheesecake, the vanilla cheesecake. They come around, and this is a great example of storytelling. They could just give you a slice of cheesecake. Like every other fucking restaurant. The guy comes round or the girl comes round with a big thing of cheesecake, and they just go like that. Scoop it on, like, how much do you want? And I'm like, we'll have a little bit more. But that's a beauty that, I mean, in food and restaurants, so many things of storytelling. But I'd love to know. So you talked about, so I interview a lot of chefs and restaurants. We've got Black Bear Burger coming on. If you ever want a banging burger, go to Black Bear Burger. I'm going up to a pizza place called Vincenzo's next week to interview this pizza guy who's just went to New York, absorbed all the pizza culture. But what the founder of Pizza Pilgrim said is that 2011 for food was a bit like 1962 for music, in that 1962 for music, you kind of had the end of, well, not the end of the war, but you had kind of, you're coming out of World War II, Vietnam's going on, there's this whole culture, these tectonic plates have just gone like that. And this explosion of kind of Beatles, Stones, Beach Boys, and then that kind of changed things. And I suppose with food, in that year you had something crazy. Like, this is not Michelin food, by the way. This is more kind of the floor being raised. I.e., there was no longer just shitty's easy. Do you know what I mean? You had Honest Burger, you had Patty and Bun, you had Bone Daddies, you had Blacklock is not in and around that period, but it was this change, and now food is just ubiquitous. Like, there's restaurants in London opening all the time. What do you think the role of status and storytelling, like how have we got to this place in food where people are so maniacally obsessed with it? Like, people have podcasts about it.
It's become a status game. I mean, like in the status game, I tell the story of Marco Pierre White, who, like when Marco Pierre White came around, Britain quite rightly had a reputation of having just horrible food, generally. And, along came Harvey's, and Britain could lay claim to the youngest chef in the world to have 3 Michelin stars. It's quite amazing. So not only was he incredibly competent, he was beautiful, he was a rock star, he was controversial. There was the book White Heat that was published, which made him look like a rock star. I mean, Anthony Bourdain said for chefs around the world, White Heat was this kind of transition point. Suddenly being a chef was was being a rock star. You know, and I think he said, you know, I can't explain to you how much impact White Heat had on the chef's world. He just turned it into this kind of rock star thing. And then how status games work in how they've always worked in the human world is that you get a high status person like Marco Pierre White, and they get surrounded by people who think, well, I wouldn't mind some of that status myself. So they start copying them, they start mimicking them. And so Marco Pierre White trains the whole generation of, you know, young chefs, most famously, of course, Gordon Ramsay. And, you know, in the status game, I quote Marco Pierre White saying Ramsay was just like, he just was copying. He was so competitive. He wanted to do what I do, dress like I do. He wanted to fish like I do. You know, he just wanted to be me. And you know, he was saying that obviously in a slightly insulting way, but that's how it works. That's how the human world works. And then, of course, you know, Gordon's come along, and what have we got now? You know, Angela Hartnett, Claire Smith, for God's sake, you know, Jason Atherton. He's trained now a whole generation of other amazing British chefs. So that's just sort of one part of the story of, like, you can see food becoming a viable status game in Britain now. Food becomes fashionable. It becomes a viable path to status, and the more status that's on offer in a particular world, the more people it's going to attract, and it becomes this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy almost. It becomes this kind of fueling fire, because the more status it offers, the more people that are going to be attracted to it. The bigger the game gets, the more status is on offer, the more people it's going to attract to it. And so we've been seeing this kind of runaway process with food in Britain, where it's becoming more and more and more and more a game in which people can earn significant amounts of status. You know, you see, like in the 90s. You know, after Marco Pierre White, you see this new rash of TV chefs, like Jamie Oliver. I know he's a bit cheesy, but you know, people like, you know, people like him coming on board and becoming celebrities. Like before Jamie Oliver, it was all, you know, TV cheffery was very it kind of was a bit square and cul-de-sac. It was like Delia Smith and Madder Jeffrey and, you know, the Roux brothers and things like this. And then suddenly it becomes much more younger and more youthy. So yeah, it's really, for me, it's all about the status that's on offer. The more status on offer, the more people it's going to attract. The more people it's going to attract, the greater the rewards. You know, the greater the competence, the greater the achievements, and, you know, it just builds and builds and builds.